Morning everybody. Slightly better morning than yesterday. Today's Saturday, and tomorrow, Sunday the 22nd of May, is what's called Rogation Sunday. That word comes from the Latin word rogare, which means to ask. And really, it's a word about asking God's blessing. And there are some of you of a particular generation who will remember Rogation Sunday as a Sunday when beating of the bounds occurred, where you go around the boundary of the parish asking God to bless all the crops and all the farmers and their work for the coming year. It was usually around this time of year. Parish boundaries have become, for most generations, rather meaningless now. They still exist for the Church of England, as lots of old things tend to do. But the idea of asking for God's blessing is something special. And we did that yesterday. You can see these wonderful bowers or arches, whatever you want to call them, for Barney and Amanda's wedding here, which was a wedding long in the planning and waiting. And despite the miserable weather in the morning, it was a joyful occasion and wonderful to give them God's blessing. That sense of God's presence, of God's love, of God's guidance, and all the things that word blessing means. It's a funny thing really that the church parish system is about recognising boundaries, and there's a whole raft of legislation about what you can and can't do within the parish, and it's all very tedious, I can assure you, as having someone who's had to gen up on occasions. But people don't live their lives by parish boundaries now, and there's always this tension in these paradoxes in Christianity. Christianity is a religion of paradox. God became a human being, the Word became flesh, something that's spirit becomes flesh, then dies. How can God die and comes back to life again? God goes up to heaven and takes out humanity. Jesus goes up to heaven and takes out humanity with him. What does that mean? I'll come to that next week. And so on. And the paradox here is in the gospel reading, one of the gospel readings for today. Jesus talks about the Father and him making their home with his followers. So God has no boundaries. A man called St. Bonaventura once described God as the perfect circle whose centre is everywhere and circumference is nowhere. Make of that what you will. It's rather wonderful, really. God has no boundaries, but we do. We need boundaries. We need boundaries in our lives. People who don't have boundaries, particularly in their minds, we call mad. We'll leave that on one side. But God has no boundaries. The Spirit has no boundaries. The wind blows where it wills, says Jesus, meaning the work of the Spirit. So we live with this tension all the time, that we need boundaries of various kinds, but God has no boundaries and takes us beyond those boundaries and out of our comfort zones. Have a good Rogation Sunday.